Hello everyone and welcome to our Fun with Food presentation for, it was picky eaters who are on our caseload. So this is a presentation that was developed by the Occupational Therapy Department in the Primary Care Services in North Cork. The contents of this presentation initially, I suppose we're going to look at when and why do children become picky eaters, the physical skills needed for feeding, postural stability and importance of correct seating, sensory processing and feeding, oral motor skills and feeding, and then some strategies and tips to support you with implementing these changes. So when and why do children become picky eaters? So there are 5 major stages in child development. At these stages, a child's physical, cognitive and sensory function develops and new skills are learned. So picky eating typically starts or changes during these developmental stages. So if we look at the different developmental shifts, picky eating can start or change at any of these stages. So between 4 to 6 months, I suppose the child is suckling, there's early chewing, first taste. It's when we transition our kids onto solids at around 6 months or 26 weeks. Eating semi-solids and developing sensory tolerances. So if we move on then to 12 to 14 months is the next developmental shift, where there is a shift in flavour perception. At 18 to 36 months, there is a shift in self-awareness, and this is often where we see the start of picky eating, or where parents will notice that there is a change. So children are aware of themselves or as their own person, so they're really aware of what does and doesn't feel good sensory wise, and their sensory preferences really come out. They're aware of their own options, that they can actively do something about it. So for example, they can say no, they can throw their bowl of cereal on the floor. There's a cognitive shift from sensory motor to magical thinking as well. And then desire to food jag. So food jag is something that we will discuss a good bit more later on in this presentation. At 5 to 7 years then there's a shift to logical thinking. Again, the desired food jag. 9 to 11 years there's a shift to abstract thought. Again, the desired food jag. So what is food jagging? So it's when a child will eat the same food prepared the same way every day or at every meal. So for example, they will only have their toast in triangles rather than squares. They will only eat McDonald's chicken nuggets. They will not eat any other type of it. They will only eat Kellogg's cornflakes. They couldn't bear to eat kind of an own brand, or they have to have their crust cut off their toaster. They couldn't possibly eat the toast. So the problem with food jags then is that children eventually get burnt out on these foods, and they're typically permanently lost out of the child's food range. So strategies to prevent these food jags will be discussed a bit later. So there are lots of myths around eating. For example, eating is an instinct, but the facts around that is eating is instinctive for the first 4 to 6 weeks of life. So we know when a baby is born, they'll have that natural sucking reflex. Then eating is reflexive between 1 to 6 months of age. So we know when we put something up to the baby's mouth, they'll open their mouth. And after 6 months of age, eating is a learned behavior. So after 4 to 6 months, a child has 3 choices: to learn to eat, to learn not to eat, and to learn to kind of or sort of eat. So another myth is that if children are hungry, they will eat. So this isn't true for children with feeding difficulties, and it's an unhelpful belief as well, I think. So the need to have the feeding skills to eat is the primary importance here. So every person is different. Every person has different preferences, different sensory preferences, different taste preferences, and feeding is very complex. It's a journey that takes time and a lot of patience. So if we look at, I suppose, feeding as the tip of the iceberg, why do children become picky eaters? So as I was saying, feeding is it's a very complex skill, and there are many different areas that we need to look at when we're trying to figure out why a child is a picky eater. So when we see a feeding difficulty, it really is the tip of the iceberg, and we have to consider what are the underlying causes. So we need to look at all of the organs. Are they all functioning in the way that they should? Are all the muscles functioning in the way that they should, keeping us posturally upright, being able to sit at the table to feed? Are all of our oral motor muscles working so that our tongue can move food from side to side and our mouth can open and close? Are all of our senses working appropriately? Is there any hypersensitivity to taste or texture or flavor or temperature? Our nutritional status as well. Are we lacking in any areas of nutrition? Learning, are we able to learn that skill to eat, to use the knife and fork together, to chew? I suppose style, capacity, history. So with regards to our learning style, with regards to our learning capacity and our learning history, are they all, I suppose, have they all been developed to teach us how to actually eat? Our general development as well is going to have a big impact on it, and our environment is a massive, massive thing that you don't really think about. So common reasons children won't eat: pain. Is there reflux there? Is there vomiting, stomach pain, acute illness, sore throat? Is there discomfort, nausea, allergies, constipation is a massive one that can affect feeding, fatigue, congestion, immature motor, oral motor, or swallow skills. So that's something we can look at in OT. Is there choking, poor oral strength, overstuffing of food, immature chew or tongue coordination, poor hand to mouth coordination? Is there sensory processing problems? That's something that we really focus on in OT, and it's kind of one of the biggest reasons that we see why there are kind of picky eating, why there is picky eating amongst a lot of our caseload. So is the child oversensitive to taste, smell, touch, difficulty with self-regulation? I suppose, are they regulated enough to sit at the table for the length of time that they need to be able to eat the meal, or do they need movement? Are they seeking movement? Are they under responsive to internal hunger signals? So when we talk about interoception, it's I suppose the sensory awareness of our internal organs. Does our stomach sense that we're hungry? Does our stomach sense that we're full? Is it thirsty? Do we need to go to the bathroom? So like texture, smell, they're big things when it comes to sensory regulation and eating. Learning or behavioral in a developmental shift. Is there learning difficulties, anxious or fearful, hyperactive or distractible? Has the child been punished at meal times? Is there no social modelling of appropriate mealtime behaviour? Is there somebody at home who's maybe kind of, as I always say at home, don't yuck someone else's yum, is kind of a learned behaviour that I don't like this certain type of food. And then if we look at environmental factors, is there a lack of exposure to a variety of food? Are you offering a variety of food to your child, or do you not like meat so you don't offer it to your child? Is there no structure to meal times? Are they kind of allowed to snack all day, and then it comes to them not being hungry at meal times? Is there toys or television on during meal times that are really distracting them from the task that needs to be completed, which is eating the meal? Is there unsupportive seating? Is there feet dangling off the ground? They mightn't have the core stability then to maintain that upright position to be able to eat. Is there a lack of routine around meal times as well? So if we look at the physical skills needed for feeding, postural stability, so that's like, can your child sit up for the duration of the feeding period? Have they got the core, the neck stability? The sensory processing skills we'll look at a bit more, and the oral motor skills. So I'll talk a bit more about these over the next few slides. In OT, we focus on the physical skills required. for feeding and consider how these skills impact a child's feeding ability. So again, another myth is eating is the body's #1 priority. So that's not true. Breathing is the body's #1 priority. If we don't breathe for I suppose a minute to 2 minutes, our brain will shut down and we will die, whereas we can go a lot longer without feeding. And then postural stability is our second priority. So it means that your head won't hit the floor, so that I can stand up. I have the postural stability to maintain myself in an upright position. I'm not going to fall over and bang my head. My brain is protected because of that. If we look at a baby when they can sit up securely, that's when we start, I suppose, introducing solids. We need the stability then to sit upright, to be able to have that hand-to-mouth movement, the chewing control of the jaw. So children with poor postural stability, then they might kind of slip or slouch down the chair while they're sitting. They might prop themselves up while sitting, using the table with their elbows or their chair or their arm to support them. So they might prefer to stand or walk around while eating. This can also be a sensory regulation or sensory seeking behaviour. If children are using an adult chair and a table, they need appropriate postural support while eating, especially if they have poor postural stability. Inappropriate seating can make the task of feeding very effortful for a child who has reduced postural stability. It can make swallowing harder. It can lead to constant movement at the table, changing positions, often falling off the chair, leaning on the table to other chairs, which again can distract the child and make it harder for them to focus. So I just want you all to try something for a minute. If while I assume that you're sitting down, can you just sit up straight, lift your feet up off the floor, tilt your pelvis forward or kind of round your back, slouch through your shoulders. And now imagine you're trying to eat your dinner in this posture. So when you're kind of creating poor postural stability there, you have no support with your feet on the floor, you have no support with the back of the chair. So I suppose that's what it's like for some children who might have poor postural stability and not be supported by their chair. So seating recommendations, so the children should be sitting with their hips, knees and ankles all bent at 90 degrees. Their elbows should be in line with the surface of the table. So a booster, seat or a box or a step or cushions or anything similar can be sat on. Their feet should be resting on a flat surface. So again, you can use a box, a step, a smaller chair, just something under their feet so that their feet isn't dangling. And a pillow can be placed behind their back for their postural support. So I have the Trip Chap chairs or the knockoff ones of them from Lidl at home for my own kids, so they can grow with the child. So I suppose the seat is a bit narrow at the top, so they have that postural support or the back support at the back, and they can grow with them then as well, where the feet plates can be put up and down to help support their feet. And I think they're quite reasonable. They're often on done deal, but you also don't need to go out and buy something new. I suppose you can make the changes with little boxes or steps or things like that at home. But just go home and have a look at your child's eating at the dinner table and see, is that something that is potentially impacting, I suppose, their ability to eat at mealtimes. So there's the suggestion. We're not affiliated with these chairs at all, but it's just to give the example of that correct seating posture where they're in that 90-90-90 position. So if we talk about then picky eating and sensory processing, so a lot of the children that are referred into us in OT have sensory processing difficulties or preferences, different preferences, which can impact on functioning a lot in these areas, including feeding. So it's really important as well for us to realise our own sensory preferences, our differences before we look at our children. So what kind of food do you like? Do you like crunchy food, or would you, with things like bananas or sloppy food, would you not be able to tolerate that at all? Do you kind of crave really high flavor, spicy foods, or do you like more bland foods? Is there certain smells that you can't tolerate? How do you like the heat or the hotness levels of your food? So have a think about all of that before you look at your child. It's really important to be aware of your own preferences. Sensory sensitivities then. So if we look at taste, smell, textures, they're not the only cause of picky eating, but it's a common area that we address in OT. So if we look here, I suppose, at the central nervous system is at the bottom, and I suppose our sensory preferences or our engagement with our sensory stimuli is the foundation for our ability to do everything else. So to, I suppose, learn, for postural security, reflex maturity, there's, I suppose, attention and concentration, hand-eye coordination. Like this all affects our ability to eat. So our senses really are at the foundation of everything. I suppose if we look at the main 5 senses that we're aware of is touch, taste, smell, hearing, and vision. And we'll briefly explain, I suppose, sensory processing and how we take in a lot of information all day as we go on. So I suppose feeding is a multi-sensory task that requires input for a lot of senses. It's the most complex sensory task that we have to do. All of our senses are stimulated by this task. We have, I suppose, we're touching the food, we're smelling it, and there's that auditory sensation as well of eating, listening to our siblings or our parents eating beside us as well. Visually then, how does it look on the plate? Is the food touching? Do we prefer a colored plate? So I suppose if our children have any sensitivities towards any of their senses, their ability to complete the task will be affected. So sensory processing skills, so our internal information. 3 other areas that we look at in OT are proprioception, vestibular processing, and interoception. I mentioned interoception earlier on. So proprioception, I suppose we have receptors in all our muscle ligaments and tendons, and that gives feedback to our brain about our position, our location, our orientation, I suppose where our body is in space and the movement of the body and the muscles. Our vestibular processing then, I suppose, it has to do with our balance, our orientation in space relative to gravity, and it really affects it's really affected if proper seating is not involved. So I suppose proprioception as well, just going back to that, it's kind of like holding the knife and fork, how hard do I hold on to it, and bringing the food up to our mouth. Where is our mouth, I suppose, if we can't see it? Our interoception then, I suppose, has to do with our internal organs. So is the food too hot or too cold? Are we oversensitive or undersensitive to that? Do we have, like when we look at our appetite, do we have our sense of feeling full or hungry? Toileting then, do we have that urge, I suppose, to go to the toilet? Do we feel that our bowel or bladder is full? Is there constipation issues? I suppose if we look at how regulated a child is as well, our proprioception and vestibular really comes into that as well. So we focus on these senses before meal times. Is the child regulated enough to be able to sit down and focus on the eating? Or do they need some sensory preparation activities first? So do they need some deep pressure, heavy work, or maybe movement, jumping on the trampoline to alert them? Do they need calming activities or alerting for them to be able to sit down? Think about meal times in the evenings. I don't know, my house is very rushed at times because you have to get the homework done. You might have camogie or basketball or whatever on that evening. And I suppose if we're in that kind of high arousal state as well, how is that stress going to affect our ability to eat? How are we feeling as a parent? Are we feeling stressed? Are we passing that stress on to our child? Do we need to take 5 minutes just to grab a cup of tea or something to calm down before we go into feeding our meal times? So there are actually 32 steps to eating, which makes feeding so complex. And it's why I said at the start that it's one of the most time consuming, and I suppose we need the most patience, I suppose, when trying to achieve this as a goal. But even if we break it down into, I suppose, just 6 steps, the main kind of 6 ones, can we tolerate the food being in the room or on our plate, like the smell? If it's fish, can we tolerate that? Can we interact with it? Can we move it around with the fork on the plate? Can we smell it? Can we touch it? Can we taste it? And finally, can we eat it? If we look at our oral motor skills and feeding, then children develop the physical skills needed for biting, chewing, and swallowing food. So these are called oral motor skills and involve movement of the tongue, the lips, the teeth, and the cheeks in a coordinated way. So if these skills don't develop, typically they can lead to feeding difficulties. Oftentimes as well, we can see that children maybe who have had some health issues when they were younger and might have had to have intubation or I suppose nasogastric tubes or things like that, that can really affect their oral motor skills developing. And sometimes if it happens as well at a developmental leap time, that can affect, I suppose, how they progress on to the next level. So if the skills don't develop, typically it can be seen as, I suppose, difficulty transitioning onto solid food. It can take a long time to chew or to swallow food, a preference for soft foods, and they'll eat processed meat. So, for example, chicken nuggets, but not fresh meat. And just a fun fact is a McDonald's chicken nugget requires the oral motor skills of a 6-month-old. So that's why I think we see a lot of the time parents telling us that they'll only eat the McDonald's chicken nuggets. So tips and strategies. So this is, I suppose, what you've all been looking for, is the tips and strategies for picky eaters. So what we really do is recommending fun with food. So using this approach separate to meal times. So there's not that pressure there to eat, that it's purely having fun with food, exposure kind of to playing with food and different textures and things like that. So preventing food jags and general tips for meal times. So if we talk about having fun with food, what does that mean? So separate meal time, setting up food play activities with your child. Choose activities that are the just right challenge. For example, if your child is very reluctant to touch something wet, allow them to use a toothpick or tweezers to pick it up instead, but they're still being exposed to it in a graded manner. The focus should be having fun, not tasting the foods. There's no pressure. There's no kind of, come on, Johnny, now try this. It's just trying to have fun to increase exposure. The child should always feel comfortable and never pressured to engage. Use the steps to eating chart, which we will send on to you, to track your child's progress. Maybe when they first see a new food, they only touch it with one finger, but after being exposed to it a few times, they can pick it up or they can smell it. The most important thing for this is that you give yourself time and you're prepared to do this, that it's not a rushed activity. What happens if we are put under pressure? Our brain, our chemical or physiological response is that kind of fight, flight, or freeze mode that we can go into. What happens then is there is an increase in cortisol and adrenaline, and these actually have a massively negative effect on our digestive system. So the digestive system just kind of shuts down and the child doesn't feel hunger. So it's just really important to think, and we're all guilty of it, like, you know, just one more bite, just try it, just smell it, whatever. But that pressure is going to have the absolutely opposite of the desired effect that you want. So to keep that in mind. So food play ideas for younger children. So messy play with flour, water, rice, lentils. You can have dry trays first and then progress onto wet trays. Dig for treasure in the mixture, for example, coins or marbles, or drive cars through it. It depends on your child's sensory preference, I suppose. If they can tolerate wet mixtures, fine, go straight onto that. But if they can't, maybe start off with the dry mixed texture. Like you can thread big marshmallows and straws to make magic wands. Finger paint with yogurt, using different flavors as different colored paints, or add food coloring. Making jewellery, so threading pasta tubes or Cheerios or any other appropriate food onto the pieces of string, and separate a bowl of berries by colour. For example, raspberries in a red bowl or blueberries in a blue bowl. One thing I do at home is that if I buy a packet of grapes, I'll ask one of the kids to take all the grapes off the vine and put them into a lunchbox for me, so they feel like they're helping mommy, they're doing a job around the house, but actually you're exposing them to maybe a food that they don't eat, and there's no pressure on them, they're just doing a job for you, while also working on their pincer grasp and their fine motor skills. So when we're looking at having fun with food, I mentioned about having time, but you need to be prepared. If you're starting off having fun with food and the next thing some jam or something sticky gets on the table and you're freaking out because, oh my God, how am I going to clean this up? That's not going to go well. It's going to, I suppose, have a negative association with your child. It's going to send them into that fight or flight mode again, where they feel like they've done wrong. So, you know, can you put a mat on the floor? This is my own child here. Like, so there's an oilcloth underneath her there. Like, she's stripped off. Her clothes are stripped off, so I don't need to worry about her getting spaghetti bolognese all over her clothes and them being stained. I can wipe down that table afterwards, and the seat that she's in that's not recommended can be thrown into the sink afterwards to clean. So I suppose it's not rushed. It's making sure you have time. Can you put on a big baggy t-shirt on your child? Can you do it outside so that they can make a mess on the floor outside and you don't have to clean it up? How regulated are we as adults? If it's something that we're not comfortable with, I wouldn't recommend doing it. So again, we're thinking about our own sensory preferences. So if mom has sensory sensitivities towards touch of wet textures or can't tolerate things like that, can we get somebody else to do it? Can dad or another person in the house take on this task? So there's some more little examples of how we can have fun with food, and just increasing exposure to the food. And we'll send on this presentation afterwards. Food exploration then for older children. Blowing peas through a straw to play soccer, tray with blueberries or any other round fruit, making fruit skewers with various patterns, making vegetable smiley faces on wraps, homemade pizzas, baking cookies, helping, actually cookies or baking in general is a lovely one when it comes to our sensory preferences, because you're starting off with the dry ingredients and then you're adding in the wet. So it kind of exposure gradually in a graded way to different sensory preferences. And I suppose it's a nice one-to-one task as well to do with mom or dad when you have the time. So can they help with dinner as well? And then that even starts from the start of, can they go do the food shopping with you? Can they pick out maybe what vegetable they might want? When there's a bit of choice around us, there can be a lot more buy-in. Can they help you with chopping the vegetables? Can they wipe down the table after the dinner? So that's exposure to food, but they know that there is not going to be any pressure to eat it because we're finished our mealtime. Again, here's some more fun with food ideas. Again, we're looking at exposure to different textures and things like that. That one up on the right is where I just got we just made bird feeders for toilet roll holders and painted a bit of peanut butter onto them and kind of dipped them in seeds and then hung them up outside. So there was again wet and dry textures, high smells, and I suppose it was a purpose as well. They knew there was no pressure to eat any of that stuff. There is my own daughter as well, just getting messy. And look, it wasn't the end of the world. I had to clean it up afterwards, but there was exposure to different smells and textures. And it did take a lot of resistance on my part to go and take the yogurt away, but I suppose, look, I had the time to let that happen. So see, let's skip on. Second out. Apologies. So I'm coming down here. I don't think we've ever had a presentation in the department where there hasn't been some technical glitches, but bear with me for 1 minute while I just skip on to the next slide. Okay, so preventing food jags then is something we talked about a lot at the start. So offer any one particular food only every other day. So because children should be eating 2.5 to every 3 hours during the day, they should be eating 4 to 6 small meals a day. So averaging about 5 meals. And at every sitting, they should be offered 1 protein, 1 starch, 1 fruit or vegetable. So they're the different food categories that you can have a look at with regards to protein, starch, and the fruit and vegetables. And look at, sometimes it's not possible, like just try your best. What if your child doesn't have enough variety in their diet? So because they're a picky eater, medically restricted food choices, for example, allergies. If a child doesn't have a wide variety of food to eat, a food every other day, then the parent needs to change something about that physical property of the food. So the shape, when I was saying about, can you change the toast from triangles to squares? Can you change the color by using food coloring? Can you change the taste? Can you change the brand, I suppose, from Aldi to Lidl cornflakes or whatever? So it can be really useful as a starting point for kids who are very specific about their brand. Start with a preferred chocolate or crisps and show them some more options of other brands or flavors or shapes, and give them control of choosing what they want to try. So I was saying earlier on about bringing them shopping, keeping a food diary. It can be a lot of work to keep the food diary, but it's very worthwhile because progress can be slow and you can kind of think, God, they're not making any changes. But when you look back over that, then you can see the progress and the changes, like that they are small, but they are actually happening. So preventing food jags as well, it's this just noticeable difference. So you have to notice the difference, but it's just very minor, but it's large enough then change to be noticed. But small enough that your child will still eat the food. So practicing on a food that has the least amount of nutrition to it, because if we mess it up, then the child might refuse, I suppose, to eat this food anymore. And you need to explain how to make teeny tiny changes, beginning with only the shape. So general tips for meal times. So relax. Easier said than done. But I suppose children sense when we're anxious or stressed or pressured, and trying to keep meal times fun and relaxed. So like it is more beneficial to just take a few minutes before meal times. If you're feeling dysregulated yourself, go out to the utility room, take 5 deep breaths, take 5 minutes to have a cup of tea, whatever it is. It is more beneficial to go into the mealtime yourself regulated, because we can't regulate our children if we're not regulated ourselves. Eliminate constant snacking and junk food. So nibbling all day can lead to bad habits. Food limiting, or try limiting food times to 5 times a day at regular meal time where possible. I know our lives are busy and there's lots of activities and we're working and things like that, but trying to limit the snacking can be really beneficial. Using a buffet style serving, so everyone starts at an empty plate and serves themselves from bowls in the center of the table. So this allows the child to choose what food they want and encourages exposure to new foods without pressure from us. So that doesn't mean putting all the bowls on the table and saying, go on, just try the carrots, go on, yeah, I know you like them. So focus on the food. So comment on the sensory properties of the food while eating. So for example, oh my God, these carrots are really crunchy, or that sauce smells really, really sweet, or God, those beans are really green, instead of the food isn't the focus or the child isn't the focus. So, instead of Go and try the carrots. I know you like them. They're yummy. Or like, my meat is really yummy. It's obvious to the child that we're trying to convince them to eat. So again, structuring meal times, the same time and place. Try a cue for eating. So for example, washing your hands. Limit meal times to 15 to 30 minutes. Then remove the food. Have no distractions. No telly on in the background. No radio. No iPads. No phones. The child stays at the table until the meal is finished. That until the meal time is finished, not until their plate is finished, I suppose. So just keeping that in mind, that the more pressure that we put on, our body goes into fight or flight, our adrenaline, cortisol increases, and that just totally crashes the digestive system, shuts down. So include the child in food prep and cleanup. I discussed that earlier. Can you bring them shopping? Can you talk about the meal planning for the week? What can their jobs be? Can their job be spraying down the table and wiping it down? Don't pressure the child. I can't stress that enough. It's not going to have a positive impact. Food is just food, okay? So this eating myth of only certain foods are healthy and we can only eat specific foods at specific times of the day. If your child wants to have a toasted sandwich for breakfast, what harm if they're eating? Do they have to have cereal? Like, they're still getting their carbohydrates, their protein. Like, can there be a fruit or veg included there? Great if it can, but getting messy then. So this eating myth of don't play with your food. Children learn through play. That's their number one occupation, is play. So don't be afraid to let your child get messy with their food. Follow their lead. Can you make it fun? We can clean up afterwards. Some resources that are nice, there's Solid Start on Instagram. So there's actually an American page of that, and there's an Irish page as well. Caroline, she's from Mallow here in Cork, and she's some really, really helpful tips and tricks. And then Pinterest or Google has lots of ideas for fun with food activities. So that is the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, you can get on to your therapist who you're linked with, and hopefully they'll be able to get back to you about them. Thanks a million.